to fit in with this unit. It's going to be different from what it's just kind of thrown into this unit for whatever reason. So it's on function inverses. So the inverse of a function reverses another function. And it's, this word denoted means the way we write it in symbols. If I have the function y, the inverse is going to be y with a -1 exponent. That -1 exponent just always means inverse. We did that in matrices. When we talked about matrix inverses, we put a -1 exponent. So what this really means, if I have one graph, so let's say I have one parabola, and it has the point 2, 3. Let's say that's somewhere on the parabola. Then the inverse, if I found the inverse, would be the point 3, 2. So it just, the x and y switch. So to find the inverse of a function, we switch the x and y, and then we solve for y, meaning we try to get the y by itself. So let's start with number 1, and we'll work through these step by step. And then your practice, every question you do on your practice will be one just like on our notes. So you'll always have one to look at the steps. So the first thing I need to do is switch the x and the y. Because in the inverse, the x and y are switched. And now I need to solve to get y by itself. So you're going to solve these the same way that you would solve any function. So if you were solving an equation and it looked like this, what step do you think you would do first? Subtract 5. Good. So we're going to subtract 5 from both sides.
We're going to give x a -5?
So we're just going to write it as x minus 5. Since this isn't an actual number, I can't type that in the calculator. So I just leave it as x minus 5 equals -3y. And then what? Divide by -3. So it's x minus 5 over -3. And I'm going to say that equals y with a -1 exponent. So I got y by itself, but the -1 exponent means inverse. So this, when you get your final answer, put the -1 exponent to show that that's the inverse. And we're done.
So would that just be our answer?
Yep.
So whatever we get for x goes over the y number?
It just depends on how it's written out. So you just solve it as if you're solving, do all the steps you would do if you're solving a normal equation. So the inverse, if I were to actually make a table of points, these two, all of the points will be flip-flopped. So if I looked at all of the points for this one and all of the points for this one, they'd be flopped. So let's go to number 2. Switch your x and y. X equals -2y plus 1. This one's very similar to number 1. What would you do first? Yep, -1, which causes those to cancel. And we write it as x minus 1. Good. Equals -2y. Yep. And then we divide both sides by -2. So x minus 1 over -2 equals y. But since I'm done, I'm going to go ahead and put my -1 exponent. That just means it's the inverse.
So since you're done, you would only put negative 1.
Yeah.
But if you still have to put 1, would you put a different number for?
You would keep going until you got the y by itself, and then you'd give it the negative 1.
Okay.
All right, so let's look at number 3. This one's a little different because I have an exponent there I'm going to have to work with. But we still switch the x and y. So x equals, hold on, y to the 5th minus 3. And what did you say you do first? We don't, this is add 3, yep. Y to the 5th. Now, what are your ideas on getting rid of an exponent of 5? Don't subtract, we don't divide, we don't multiply. It's not a square root, it's the 5th root. So whatever exponent you have, so if we have an exponent of 5, we take the 5th root. If we had an exponent of 4, we would take the 4th root. So it's basically just a square root symbol with a little 5. And what that does is that gets rid of the exponent of 5. So when you have an exponent, so like if we had x squared, to get rid of the squared, we did the square root. We've practiced that. So now we have a 5, we do the 5th root. And so we have the 5th root of x plus 3 equals y. That 5th root basically canceled out the 5th exponent. And then I can just give my inverse symbol, and I'm done.
What makes it an inverse? What is an inverse?
It's basically the opposite of a function. Their two functions are reversed. Inverses. So this process we do is the process of finding the inverse. Number 4. Switch the x and the y first. Subtract 1, good. So this one's a little different than number 3 because I have that 2 in the front. And you got to get rid of that first. The exponent is going to be the last thing we get rid of. So how do I get rid of this 2 in front? Divide by 2. So I get x minus 1 over 2 equals y to the 4th. And do I have my y by itself? No, there's a little 4 there. How do we get rid of that 4? We would do the 4th root. Yeah, that's how we say that. So the 4th root. And then give it the inverse symbol. Are there any questions? Switch your x and y. So we cannot add 2 yet. Notice how that whole thing is under this radical. It's like it's in the house, under the house. You've got to get rid of the house first. If the -2 was here on the outside, that would be different. But since it's all under the radical symbol, we've got to get rid of that first. So how do we get rid of a 5th root? What did we do the last times? We had an exponent and we took the root. So this time, if we have the root, we give it an exponent. The roots and the exponents cancel each other out. So if this is the 5th root, I'm going to raise it to the 5th power. And that's going to cancel out the root. So it gives me x to the 5th equals y minus 2. And then I can add 2. Yep. X to the 5th plus 2 equals y. That's all by itself, so I can give it the -1 exponent, which just means inverse. Let's look at number 6. Switch the x and the y. Yep. So everything is under this cubed root, so we have to raise it to the 3rd power. And that's going to get rid of the root. It's x to the 3rd equals 2y plus 5. Then we subtract 5. And we get x cubed minus 5 equals 2y. Yep, and then I divide by 2. Any questions?
One second.
Number 7. Switch the x and y. Notice on this one, everything is in the parentheses being squared. So that's what I have to get rid of first. And how would I do that? The square root. Good. Now with the square root, you don't need to write a little 2. That's just assumed. So we do the square root. And that gives us the square root of x equals y plus 1. subtract 1. Now you've got to be careful when you write your answer that -1 is not under the square root. So make sure it's obvious. Make sure your line, you don't get sloppy and make your line go out. Yep. Any questions on that one? So number 8, switch the x and y. So it is to the 4th power, so we have to take what we call the 4th root. So it's like the 4 symbol. So we would have the 4th root of x equals 2y minus 3. Yep. And then I add 3.
I cannot see the board. The window, like.
So we get the 4th root of x plus 3, and that plus 3's got to be outside, equals 2y. And then there's a 2 in the front, so we divide by 2. Are there any questions? Yep. So, got 2 more. Switch your x and y. Now this one's a little different because we have a plus 2 that's on the outside. I can't take the cube root yet until I get rid of that. So subtract 2 from both sides. So now I can get rid of this exponent of 3 by taking the 3rd root, or the cube root. So we have the cube root of x minus 2 equals 3y minus 7. And then I add 7. Now I cannot do -2 plus 7 and get 5 because the -2 is under the square root, the 7 is not. So they're just separate. So it's just the cube root of x minus 2 and then plus 7. Yep. And then we divide by 3. there any questions on number 9? Number 10 is very similar. Switch your X and Y. And what should I do first? Subtract this one that's here on the outside.
Take the cube root of 3.
Yep. Cube root. So I have the cube root of x minus 1 equals y plus 1. And what do I need to do to finish up? Subtract this 1. And that minus 1 is outside because we're doing it after we wrote the root. So it's the cube root of x minus 1 minus 1 equals y. And I don't have anything to divide by, so it's just, I'm done. Give my -1 symbol. And that's it. Are there any questions?
Wait.